thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, The Dark Side of AI, Gender Bias in Technology. As mentioned, my name is Leroy, and I'm here with my other colleague, Courtney Catt, representing C2 Training Solutions. And today, we're excited to have this discussion with our panel of experts, Professor Johan Steyn, Nomsa Nteleko, and Siobhain O'Mahony, who will be guiding us through this very critical topic, and also just to discuss how AI intersects with gender and the implications for tech innovation. Just before we begin, just some house rules. All microphones and cameras will be turned off for the duration of the call. We recommend that if you have any questions, put it in the chat section and we will answer it during the call, but there will be a Q&A section at the end of the call. Hi, LaRue, Hermione, LaRue. If you have a question, please just pop it in the chat. And yeah, Professor Johan Steyn, it's over to you. And thank you to our experts just for being part of this call.
Leroy, thank you to you and Courtney and the team at CTU for setting this up. Much appreciative. I'm so privileged to be joined by two of the smartest and most kind and incredible people I've ever met and collaborated with, both Nomsa and Siobhain. And I look forward to a kind but honest conversation about a very, very important topic. Thank you for everyone who have joined us. And like Leroy said, please pop your questions into Teams. If there's a question relevant to the discussion at the time, Leroy will interrupt us and ask us to comment on it, but then we will try and leave about 20 or so minutes toward the end to get to the various questions and comments. So I call myself a human-centered AI advocate, and with that I mean that even though I work in the tech and I help clients implement it and build their strategies around it and educate them, I always try and bring back the human element. This will impact us as workers, as colleagues. It'll definitely impact our children and their children in ways we can't even imagine. So the idea about biases and the fact that we often build systems that would typically only really serve people like us. It's human nature, it's our biases. Given the most powerful technology we've ever built, AI, and becoming exponentially more powerful, it's an important topic to speak about, not just gender biases in the workplace, but also gender biases as it relates to this powerful technology. So I'm so glad that I'm joined by two incredible ladies. And Nomsa, I'll start with you. If you can introduce yourself, tell the audience what you're doing, and also briefly just your interest in this specific topic.
Thank you, Johan, and thank you to you for really inviting us for this amazing topic. We're excited to also have CTU, having this discussion because it's a very important discussion. My name is Nomsa Nteleko. I was introduced to technology long time ago. So I must say that when I was thinking of a career choice, technology was not one of those. Initially, I thought that I would pursue medicine. So post-matric, when I was volunteering to a surgery just to be nearer to what I wanted to achieve, the doctor introduced me to a laptop. And for me, it was love at first sight. Subsequent to that, then I joined Sage, which is a company that gave me a great opportunity to understand how technology meets with accounting. And 12 years ago, I started my company called OS Holdings. What we do, or what we're passionate about, is to automate business processes from finance, human resources, asset management, procurement, etc. But in 2020, I had an amazing pleasure of joining Amatuba AI, which is an artificial intelligence startup that focusing on aggregating artificial intelligence in Africa. So we look at the best AI solutions or developers in the country and globally, and we bring artificial intelligence to the business. And it's very important for women to really partake, with technology, specifically artificial intelligence, because this is where the future of technology is going. So I'm really, really excited that I'm in technology, even though it was a journey that I bumped into, thank God.
Sure. And Nomsa, thank you. I know that the conversations we've had with Matuba AI and what you guys are doing with municipalities regarding ethical procurement, looking at avoiding corruption and the like, and that's just a slice of the pie. You guys are doing great work. Actually, a practitioner in this field. Very excited to have you here. And Siobhain, lovely to see you as well. We've spoken many times. Again, like Nomsa, you guys are so smart. I don't even know what to say. Please introduce yourself and the work you're doing, and also a bit of your history.
Thanks, Johan. Thanks so much, and good morning to everybody. I think, Johan, just to kick off and to echo what Nomsa said, really, thank you for such a warm welcome, and thank you to CTU Training, really, for hosting, I think, what is such an important discussion. As you said, not only in the context of gender bias in AI, but more broadly also. So, as Johan has said, my name is Siobhain Omani. I am an actuary by qualification. I think you're perhaps similar in a way to Nomsa. When I started out, didn't really perhaps think I'd sort of end up where I have in the context of data and analytics, but very glad that I have, because it's what I'm absolutely passionate about and what I love to sort of get up, every morning and do. But I'm currently a consultant specializing in data and analytics consulting. I've got probably about 15 years experience in the field. And that's really across sort of the data and analytics value chain. And that also includes my previous role prior to starting my own consulting business, where I was the head of analytics for Investec. For almost about 9 years, I built the analytics function there from nothing to a fairly well-established team that was really busy day to day. So that was very, very exciting. And I think just in the construct of this conversation and the context, I think throughout my career, I've been exposed to both sort of the potential and the pitfalls of technology, especially in data analytics, not just the AI side of data and analytics, but more broadly. So I'm really passionate about, I think, developing inclusive technology solutions, AI solutions, and really looking to exploring the topic more today. Thank you.
Thanks, Siobhain. Look, so why is this an important topic to me as a dude? I'll maybe just set the scene before we go into the questions. Luckily, I've had some exercises in self-awareness over the last few years, because like all of us, I'm a result of how I grew up, the family I grew up in, the culture I grew up in, the work experience I've had. And I'm keenly aware of some of my biases, probably not all of them, because we all are biased. We are humans. And that's why I always advocate that when we build these powerful AI systems, we need a diverse team, not a big team necessarily, a core team, but definitely people of different ethnicities, obviously from a gender point of view or gender identification point of view, multi-age, because this generation, they're now talking about generation alpha. I haven't kept up with all the different ways of talking about all these youngsters. But the risk is that we will build a system, a powerful system that makes automated decisions that reflects us, just us. And I'll give you an example shortly. But not just that do I think we need diversity, we also need, and this is always my advice to my business clients, make sure that that core team consists of people from different disciplines. You have to have legal involved, organizational design, change management, and many other functions to make sure that the thing that we're building, that makes decisions like humans do, and that's becoming super powerful, and that's infiltrating our lives and our customers and our operations, that it represents the best for everyone we're serving, not just all of us as staff members, but all of us as customers, and also from a societal point of view. So here's the example I wanted to give you. If one of my banking clients asked me to build an algorithm to identify potential family units within their database. So say they might have 600,000 customers, like our big banks have, or more. And they might want to sell educational, insurance, or financing solutions to these families. The way I would build it, if I was left to myself, based on my worldview, is that a family is a man and a woman, possibly with children. And that's not wrong, but it's incomplete. And that's when I need a colleague to say, Johan, but what about same-sex couples? What about single parents? What about people who don't want to or cannot have children? And so forth, probably 12 or 15 different iterations of what it means to be a family. So I would have, typically human nature, built something that reflects me. I build it in my image. And that's why this topic from a gender and a diversity point of view is so important, especially when it comes to our children's future, that we make sure that we build these powerful models that reflects everyone and everyone's interest and the best for everyone and not just ourselves. And one confession I want to make, ladies, and again, why is this dude on this thing? Because it's so important to me. I've got an adopted child. He's brown. He's now 10. I can already see some of the societal bias he's playing a role in his life. 2 weeks ago, I was on a flight back from Cape Town. And I'm just going to be honest with you now, but at least I'm aware of it. So when the pilot came onto the speaker to say, we're taxiing out, the weather in Joburg is so-and-so, the flight's going to be 2 hours long, there's going to be some bumps halfway through, I realized that not only was the pilot, but also the other pilot, both were women. And honestly, for a split second, I thought, oh my word. And immediately I corrected myself, because they're probably better pilots than all the guys in this company, this airways or whatever you want to call it. But it is a result of how I grew up, of my history, and something that I'm also keen to unpack with you, Nomsa and Siobhain, is also how we as guys, as men, because a lot of us are not bad guys. There are a lot of bad guys out there, the narcissists and the like, but some of us are just really stupid. How we can learn to get better at this topic. So having said that, Siobhain, let me ask you, why is it important, given this age of AI and all this stuff we see happening and how powerful it's getting, that we make sure that we are inclusive from a gender point of view in the way we develop and roll out these platforms?
Thanks, Johan. And before I answer that, I think I just wanted to make one comment on your intro, where you spoke about the risk of sort of not having diversity in your teams. And I think just importantly there, the anecdote I can add from my own experience is that it's not only around what the solution you build or propose looks like, but it's actually about the sameness in the thinking when you are trying to solve the inherent problem itself and the approach you take to that you will actually lack diversity in how you'd actually think about unpacking that problem before you've even tried to then attempt the solution, which in itself has its own inherent challenges. But I think, Johan, to jump to your question, and I really don't know that I can do much more justice to it than what you actually already alluded to in your introduction. And I think it's very much just that, gender diversity, and I suppose any form of diversity, as you said, in AI development is really crucial for creating systems that are truly representative and equitable. So again, even in my own experience, but there's research behind this, you'll find that diverse teams, specifically those who have a balanced representation of genders, bring a much broader range of perspectives and experiences to the table. So it helps you to challenge your assumptions, to actually identify the potential biases that might exist. And really, it ultimately leads to a more robust and accurate and ethical AI models, which is a subject on its own, but that specifically caters to the needs of all those users, as you spoke about. So, I think without gender diversity, there's a much higher risk of unconscious biases creeping into designs, potentially resulting in AI systems that actually perpetuate very harmful stereotypes, or exclude certain groups entirely. And there's various examples of those which we perhaps can chat through the discussion. But what I want to actually reference here is to demonstrate that this isn't just theoretical, and that studies have shown real world consequences of the lack of diversity. There was research done by MIT Media Lab, which found significant disparities in facial recognition accuracy across genders and skin tones. And specifically, darker skinned women experienced error rates as high as 34%, compared to near perfect accuracy for lighter skinned men. Now, if you just think of that stark discrepancy, it surely highlights the critical need for balanced representation in AI development, because you can just think of the consequences of something like that for things like security alone. Thanks, Jan. I'll pause there.
Okay, and I'm glad, Siobhain, that you mentioned facial recognition, because even though it is so much more advanced than a few years back, it still struggles to recognize female faces and people of darker skin tones. And a great Netflix documentary I always refer people to is Coded Bias. I think it's Timid Gebru and crew. She did amazing work at, I think it was at Google, if I'm not mistaken, until she resigned because of their biases. But it's essentially about this African-American woman who realized that the facial recognition doesn't pick up her face until she put a white mask on her face, and then it picked her up. It's a 4 or 5 part series. I think it's such a great series to watch, Coded Bias, because again, it shows you that this technology is not serving everyone. We saw, was it 2, 3, 4 years ago, the wrongful arrests in the US around the movement, with people of darker skin tones being identified by security cameras as potential criminals or terrorists, wrongfully so. So it also brings us to the African conversation, not just the gender diversity conversation, but are we in Africa being served by this global technology? And to what extent do we need to almost rebuild these data models to make sure that when it comes to our languages, our chatbots, our conversational AI, our facial and biometric recognition is serving us? Fantastic. Nomsa, on your side, any introductory remarks on this topic?
I think for me, at the end of the day, the minute you are born as a woman, obviously the fact that you are a woman and you are born specifically in Africa, the gender roles are already defined, be it from the family that you are coming from, the schools that you are attending, as well as the environment that you are born under. So the change that needs to happen, it really needs to start from the family setup, as well as from the schools that you are going into. And because once that is addressed, it would be easier to address the biases, when you are getting to a level where we need to be developing systems. So that is one of the things that we really need to be looking at as an introduction and as my comment to what Siobhain is speaking about.
These biases, speaking as a man now, it's sometimes so subtle. Again, it's not because you're a bad guy or a narcissist. You just don't even know. It's a joke we make about women should stay in the kitchen, and we all laugh about it, or whatever. It's stupid jokes, and it's not meant badly, but it is actually very stupid. Again, my boy is 10. What kind of man am I raising? So what I'm trying to do in my own little way is, and he often doesn't get it right because he's a kid. When a woman enters the room, you stand up and you say hello and you're respectful. And I think for a lot of young men, we probably don't live in a society where it is emphasized by fathers in particular, or by the home environment that they are in, or by our schools for that matter. And if I look at some of the things my son's watching on YouTube, even though I must say I have very strict settings around the kind of content he can access, but every now and then I will say to him, that joke that you just saw, that little skit, that little video, it was wrong. Because it's so subtle. It's not way out talking about how bad women are. It is subtle, and then he will laugh because it is funny. But then as a dad, I need to explain to him that it is not at all. And maybe one story that was a great learning for me is I was working for a large bank and my boss was a woman. Most of my bosses have been women, and I always got on really well with them, because at least there's not a lot of testosterone and nonsense involved, and they just leave me alone to do my thing. But I remember we were sitting in this meeting. She was the only woman in the room. We were about 6 or 7 guys. And I picked up something very interesting, is then whenever we as men speak in the meeting, all the other men turn their body language toward the man who is speaking and look at him. But whenever she was speaking, and she was our boss, almost no one looked at her. We did acknowledge, people nodded their heads and stuff. And I picked it up that day. This is about 10 years ago. And when she left for a call, I said to the guys, when she speaks, like you do with us, turn out of respect, turn your body toward her, acknowledge her, listen to her. And I think, and none of them, I knew all of them very well, none of them were really bad guys. I just think they didn't even realize they're doing it. So it's interesting for me to also uncover from both of you and maybe from the comments of the audience is how do we help young boys and men to learn, because they will probably not learn this at home or in school. But Siobhain, I want to ask you just some of your maybe experiences regarding this topic. I mean, again, you worked at banks like Investec, you worked at some very powerful companies.
Yeah.
You're very smart. You definitely can stand your ground. You probably have had many experiences where either you were ignored or I don't know what. Just give us, without maybe mentioning where it was, but just some examples.
Yeah. Yeah, no, sure, Johan. I mean, and certainly, you know, and it's not a tale of all bad. I also just want to emphasize that. So I think, you know, the danger in this conversation is also in painting, for example, all men, and importantly, I want to emphasize women, because it's not just men who are guilty of these sorts of behaviors. Women are also guilty to themselves around these own behaviors. And I think that's really important also in terms of women, for example, perpetuating what a stereotype around sort of the typical woman is, you know, for women who perhaps have chosen not to have children and pursue a career, and other women then, you know, potentially have a view of that that's negative. You know, all of those are similarly still biases perpetuating a stereotype. So I really also don't want the conversation to just degenerate into sort of almost men versus women, because in my experience, certainly it's not always been the case, you know, and as I say, sort of other women can be as guilty of not supporting women and perpetuating those biases. But as I say, I also don't want to sort of paint the image of, you know, all men, as you say, are sort of evil or whatever it might be, because in my career, I must say I've seen both sides of it. I've been incredibly fortunate to have men, what I will say is typically in senior leadership, who have been incredibly supportive, who have opened doors for me, who have been incredibly encouraging, you know, mentors, all of that sort of thing, and who really at the end of the day, you know, make it about the skill set and the value you've got to add, and you know, being present at that table. On the other side of things, I've also experienced those sorts of biases, exact examples you've referred to, where you will be talking in a room, in a meeting, giving an opinion, giving a view, and suddenly majority of the men need to take a smoke break, you know, and sort of leave a room, or as you say, you know, aren't able to sort of engage with you in the same way that they would a male colleague. I must say, in my own personal experience, again, and this might just be my unique situation, I've probably experienced that more from what I consider peers, as opposed to sort of perhaps a more senior leader in the organization. So I don't know if that also comes with a sort of perhaps generational thing, an experience thing, a maturity in leadership, you know, aspect. And I'm not saying all senior leaders also get this right. This is my sort of personal experience. Or from perhaps subordinates, you know, and maybe not my direct subordinates, but sort of more junior colleagues questioning, you know, why are you at the table? Why are you sort of giving the view? So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think in some respect, you know, as you say, men perhaps are not even equipped with how to sort of engage and deal on some issues that they would have no trouble with men. You know, I recall a situation where a male colleague and I there was quite a bit of tension between the two of us regarding a particular matter we were working on. And, you know, his approach to dealing with this, whenever we'd sort of engage in a tough conversation in a meeting, whatever, would be exactly as you said, to actually turn his back to me in responding and respond to my team members. Which interestingly enough, I didn't actually even pick up on. So perhaps that's my own sort of blind spot, or perhaps I was just too focused on the subject at the end of the day. But when he had stepped out of the room, my team members said to me how ashamed they almost were of the behavior, and that's how the person was showing up. And I think it's, you know, if that individual was having a conversation with a man, I question if that sort of would have been his response, or if he again would have been comfortable enough to tackle it straight on. You know, with the female. So yeah, I think, as I say, there's lots of examples of it, questioning why are you at the table, why are you giving an opinion, but equally I must say in my career been fortunate to also have had incredible male mentors, and actually in the instance, I must say, who've been more supportive to me than sort of my female counterparts, because I also think that what some of this gender bias sort of perpetuates is an unhealthy competition between females, because there are so few potentially opportunities at a point in time, and opportunities to get to the table. So that's sort of another, I think, very dangerous sort of aspect of this, you know, and of the dynamic.
Yeah, and you make such an important point, because I think probably most women on this webinar today have experienced this. But it's not just women, men experience it too, probably much less, but it's not solely just women. And Nomsa, I want to ask you, and especially from an African female point of view, a female of color, because one of my best friends is the chief information officer at one of our large investment banks. And often when we have a coffee, and she's exceptionally smart, but she would say many times when she's in senior meetings or board meetings, it feels like she's just a tick box from a diversity point of view. And they don't really listen, and she doesn't really get a chance to speak. What's your experience with this?
So, Johan, that is actually a thing, you know, as much as, you know, there are so many men help us in terms of, you know, putting us into spaces where we need to add value. We do experience those challenges where, as a Black woman specifically, it's like you're approached because then it ticks the BEE. It also ticks the woman, and meaning that you are put in a room, but no one is interested in what you are saying. And that is very demoralizing, so to speak, because then when these conversations are coming to the table, you're not sure whether is this a BEE conversation, is this a tick box conversation, or someone actually values my opinion. You know, I had a situation where I had a client that was refusing to pay me, and I actually put in measures for them to start paying. And when she called OS Holdings and she discovered that, oh, the CEO is a woman, and she says, I don't speak to women, and therefore I'm not going to have this conversation with you. And my IT manager at the time was male, and he actually said, I'd rather speak to him for us to get to a situation where you are resolving this issue. And I allowed it at that time for my male counterpart to have a conversation with him. Now, here's a problem with that, Johan. The minute you give that power away, you never regain it back. You know, and I think that in hindsight, at that moment, I should have refused to say, if you're not speaking to me, then no one will speak to you. To show that once you give the power away, you never get it back. Then they continued having the conversation and the issue was resolved. But we need to learn and unlearn a lot of things as women and men, because when these things are happening, you're not really realizing what exactly is happening. You know, my male counterpart, I believe he would have said, no, actually, Nomsa is the right person to speak to. But because he wanted to solve a problem at that particular moment, he sort of immediately went into solving it. So we do experience those challenges where there are people who are brazen and are saying, you are a woman, you're an African woman, really, I do not have, I cannot be speaking to you. And that's why earlier I was saying that this teaching starts in a family. I'm coming from a family where my father embraced the fact that I was a female, and he encouraged me to say, you actually need to be educated so that should you get married, you become a helper to your partner. And if you don't get married, guess what? You should be able to survive in the world and really impact your society positively. So I think one of the things that are important, we need to have more women that have a voice that are sitting in these tables. It does not matter how difficult it can be to sit in that table. You have to sit, you have to get your voice heard so that the women that are following behind you, they have an example to say it has been done and it is possible to do it. And I also really agree with Siobhain to say that as women, we also have biases within us because you are afraid to stand, you are afraid to raise your voice, you know, simply because you were not born in an environment that allows you to raise your voice. And therefore, if we can change this, even at an ECD level, You know, when kids are starting to go to preschool, you know, the toys that they're playing with, there should not be saying this is where your career should be going. So we need to clean it right there and then to say, when you are a woman, you can actually achieve your wildest dreams. You are a creator. And the beautiful thing is that once a woman is given an opportunity to partake and impact a certain space, 9 out of 10, they actually do so much better, you know, and they do very well. Women are not given an opportunity to thrive, and they're not given an opportunity to do the great things they're capable of doing. You know, so it is something that we need to be intentional about it. I mean, you find in our IT environment, the IT male bosses, they're not keen to bring in women from the IT in their IT departments. They're very shy in a sense that they would say, because your IT, you're working 24/7. And now when you're bringing in a woman, you need to consider their family. You need to consider that at some point they may take maternity, you know, and you should be okay with that. Meaning we need to create conducive environment and conducive work environment that allows a woman not to have to choose between a successful career or being a successful mom, a successful wife, or a successful partner. So those are the things that we need to learn and make sure that we have a conducive environment for women to add value in an IT environment, in an AI space.
Wow. You lead me to my next question. I'll start with you, Nomsa, and then ask you, Siobhain, because you both are parents as well. Yes, there are men who are single parents, but the vast majority of single parents are women. And I don't always know if men managers, especially if they don't have kids, but even if they do, can show the kind of understanding for issues around sick kids, something happened at school, we need to go for tests, which a lot of men just dump on women and the guys leave, you know. So maybe if you can comment on that as well, whether I'm actually not sure whether you're single parents. I don't think you are, but you obviously know many women. How does that incredible responsibility of looking after a child or children, and like you said, Nomsa, I like that, because you can be exceptionally successful and a good mother or a good partner or wife at the same time. But it's almost like the cards are stacked against you as women. You know, so what would you advise a young up-and-coming female who's maybe not a mother yet, she's climbing the corporate ranks, looking at having a family, some of the things to look out for and to prepare herself for? Nomsa and then Siobhain.
So I think, you know, if I would speak to young females that are starting their careers as well as starting their families, because that is the other odd thing, you know, as a female, you're starting your career at the exact time where you have to be starting your family. And the pressures are mounting on both ends to say, you know, why are you not starting? So what I would say is that we have to allow women to start having their families as early as possible, because there is that thing that is called biological clock, meaning that the environment or the companies that they choose, they need to be in alignment in terms of embracing a family, healthy families. You know, so we should not stop women from procreating or having families because now they have to be looking at their careers. The companies need to have HR policies that are enabling for women to have families. I must say, one of the blessings that COVID has brought to us is the hybrid environment. And us being in technology, you know, you are able to work from anywhere. And therefore, that gives you and that allows you time to actually spend with your family while you are really adding value into the company that you are working for. So I would say women must not be shy. They need to study. They need to ensure that they're continuously increasing their knowledge. The beauty of it is that there are online courses that will enable you to grow in your corporate ladder while you're growing in your family. But I would also like to speak to families. I am a single mother, and I think what made it easy for me was that my son was embracing my entrepreneurial nature. So meaning you need to sort of bring in a culture in your family of a good support structure. I have a lot of nieces, I have a lot of sisters, I have a mother, I have, so my child has a makulu, a grandmother, that when I'm not available, they can be taken care of. But also we have created a very supportive family structure that even when I'm not available, there's enough love in the family that is supporting me and my career. So it is important that we create a conducive environment right in the family, because if my son can embrace me as his mother, as a career woman, it will be very easy for the woman that he will marry, because he will understand that this woman doesn't necessarily have to be in the kitchen and really be there just for procreation, but she can really add so much value, intelligence, and embrace a community that empowers women to succeed. So that would be my input.
You remind me of that saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think a lot of us these days live very individual kind of lives where we might not have family near, which is sad, because what do you do as a woman or as a man, but single parent, and you wake up and your child is sick and you've got an incredibly important meeting in 2 hours, so, but I think what I pick up, Nomsa, is to, whether it is family or trusted people around you, is to foster that community feeling so that you can help each other out.
Yeah.
Incredibly important. Thank you. Siobhain, as a mother on your side, any comments on what Nomsa said? You're still on mute. Did you hear me?
Yeah, no, if you were chatting to me, sorry, I lost you for a second. Would you mind repeating?
No, not at all. I think you're also a mother, and maybe just some commentary from your perspective and experience on some of the things that Nomsa said. The challenge of being a mother, whether it's a single mother or not, but given the corporate pressure and children and the issues around that.
No, thanks, Johan. Yeah, so absolutely, I'm a mum. I'm not a single mum. I'm very lucky to have a very supportive husband who does absolutely jump in when needed. But yeah, and look, I think it's an incredibly complex question that you've asked. What I will say, and this is not to scare any of the women on this call or even the men who are husbands, but you might have in your mind about sort of how difficult it's going to be to try to juggle all of these balls in the air. I think my learning was it was probably 5 to 10 times more difficult than what I even anticipated, particularly as a first-time mom. I think it probably gets easier as you've had your sort of first rodeo and you kind of know what to expect and what not to. I think what I would say, and I think Nomsa mentioned, we need to sort of, from an organizational perspective, not create environments where women sort of can't, have children as early as possible or need to defer it in terms of timing of their careers. I suppose I would take a slightly different view to that, and that I'd say we need to create environments that allow women to make the conscious decision around their, when they want to have children, that sort of thing, and not then judge them for that or prejudice them for their decision in any way. So for example, in my experience, in all honesty, I was married for 10 years before I had my daughter. It was a conscious decision on my part. My husband wanted kids from day one. And I said to him, look, right now, I'm not ready. My choice is to focus on my career, is to build that career, and I will know when I am then ready, to take on motherhood. He kept nagging, but what was interesting to that is also the response I received from my female colleagues, who was sort of like, what's wrong with you? You don't want children. I remember when I told my mother-in-law that we were pregnant, the response I got was, oh, I'd written you off. So that equally exists. I think, at the same time, though, for women who do want to focus more initially early on their families and raising a family, some of what I have observed in organizations I've either worked for or worked with is a prejudice to them also, that there's a sort of view that you're not going to be as available as a mom or as a woman without children, and hence automatically the opportunities to you potentially become more limited. You're sort of cut off before you've even been given the opportunity, and that in itself then is also problematic. Again, in terms of how organizations solve some of this, I don't have the silver bullet answer, because there is a reality to corporate life, and there is a reality to needing to be available to the organization at certain times and that sort of a thing. I think there are organizations who've probably done quite progressive things around some of it. We talk about hybrid. I prefer to talk about flexible, because for me, and I've observed this through some of the boards that I'm involved in and I sit on, where we've needed to change policies around hybrid work to sort of back to the office. When you listen to the staff and the employees, and particularly the females around it, it's not hybrid that was the solve and the sort of thing that they loved. It was flexibility. Now, flexibility can happen whether you're in the office or not. That's a cultural thing also. So why is it that when I'm at home working, I can suddenly go fetch my child from school, but the minute I'm in the office, I can't? That there shouldn't be a difference as to where I'm located, as to whether I can fetch my child at lunch or at the end of a school day. It's the principle of flexibility. And that's where I think culturally then some organizations have done very well with that, others not. And again, to apply it at an organizational levels, again, too broad brush, because even within an organization, there will be different leaders who, are supportive in different ways. I think to your question, Johan, of, can men truly understand what it's like for a mom, a working mom, and the pressures? I think it's potentially quite difficult. I've had a lot of these conversations with my husband himself, to say to him, you're not just thinking about work, almost when, and this might not be true of all men, but sort of when you leave for the day, your 9 to 5 is just work. Mom is trying to juggle the same work responsibility and pressure with, is she dressed appropriately for the weather? Have I got what I needed her for lunch? Etc. The smallest things, and I'll remember a funny anecdote one time when my husband came home and I was so stressed about things, and his comment was like, what's wrong? Just relax, which is probably the worst thing you could ever say to me. But I said to him, all right, then let's relax. How much has your daughter, who was then a couple of months old, had to eat today? And he couldn't answer me. And he's like, well, that's unfair. I'm like, no, it's not unfair. Why is it unfair that dad should know those things versus mom? So it does exist, as much as people are so well-intended. And as I said, my husband is fantastic in terms of the support he gives me. There's these sort of small nuances that really are difficult. But I would say it's not only men, I think, who might struggle to understand what it's like to be a mom. It's women who don't have children too. And I'm an example of that. I said I was 10 years into my marriage, probably about 14 years into my career even, before we had our little girl. And I genuinely tried as a leader to be as supportive to my team and their needs for flexibility and those sorts of things as I could be. But I'm absolutely guilty of when a working parent, mom or dad, might have come to me and needed extra time, or there was an excuse, for something, of thinking, oh, the kid excuse again, or whatever it is. And only now that I am a parent can I fully appreciate actually the authenticity of that and how difficult things might have been, and recognize where I myself misstepped, even as a female. So again, I think these prejudices and biases exist differently depending on the source of them, but it's not particular necessarily to a specific gender, is again what I would just say. Perhaps it's heightened, in that respect. But yeah, I think then also just to come back to maybe the things you said, for females to look out for, or who's thinking of becoming mums. As I said, it's a really conscious decision. I think you need to try to fully appreciate what's potentially expected of you in both worlds, and a lot of that also comes down to your parenting philosophy and how involved you do want to be, how involved your partner wants to be, those sorts of things. I think you need to be prepared for difficult conversations that you're going to need to have around things like your availability if you're not self-employed, around flexibility, around pay. I mean, I know instances of where people have asked to slightly reduce hours or so and have been severely hammered in terms of their take-home pay. Things like that. And those are tough conversations potentially you need to look out for, unfortunately. And I think it's things like, be critical around the culture of the organization you're involved in. There, as I say, are organizations who do have great benefits for moms, things like perhaps daycare on site, those sorts of things. Those all really help. But at the same time, be open to the immense joy so like I said, I don't want this to scare people, that motherhood will bring. And I think how it will enhance your effectiveness in the workplace, not only as a leader, because you can now, like I did, better appreciate a broader context, but because I think it adds a different dimension to you as a human being that makes you that much more effective, particularly in, I think, our technology and AI space and the types of problems we have the potential to solve, socioeconomic problems, those sorts of things. So yeah, I think
that's great, both of you. I've got one more question before we, toward the end, pivot toward the AI data science conversation, because we have a massive problem in Africa regarding the amount of young females going into the field, the education system and the like. But I want to reference a good friend of mine who's very senior at a local insurance company. What she told me is not that there's outright discrimination because she's a woman and that the men are really horrible to her. It is just that no one listens. She's in all the meetings, they ignore her. So, and then the question is, and if you're a parent specifically, is do we just, for the sake of at least I've got a job and it's not as bad as it could have been, just deal with it? Or what would your advice be to a woman that, again, it's not extreme, you have to take legal action, etc. You can probably hang out for another 5 or 10 years doing the job, but no one still listens to you. What would your advice be? Because there must come a time where I've had enough. But then there's the family pressure and the budget and the like. We're going to start with you, Siobhain, and then go to you, Nomsa. What would your advice be to a woman in that situation?
Sure, yeah, and again, I think another really incredibly complex question, because obviously, you know, you need to be able to be in the position to appreciate perhaps the financial pressures and the responsibilities. And I think that then touches on a whole other rabbit hole of just broader opportunities in the South African context and unemployment rates and that sort of stuff. And that is a really, really harsh reality, you know, so it'd be very easy for me to sit here and potentially be quite sort of condescending around it, to say, of course you should stand up for it. Like, no, you know, don't take it, don't tolerate that, etc., etc., etc. Fight the good fight. But sometimes that is also just not realistic. And it's difficult. Like I've just said, just even in the context of some of the conversation on motherhood, those are not easy conversations, you know. So again, from my perspective, how I'd handle it, I'd fight. Absolutely, that's my personality. That's who I am. But I do have the fortunate sort of stance of, you know, if things had to go awry, you know, job-wise, I've got fallbacks. I've got a support system. I've got adequate savings for a short period of time. So I'm fortunate to be in that position, you know, as I can say, which does afford you a different lens. If we're blatantly honest here, I mean, you know, we need to be. But I would say, you know, if you are going to have the conversation, let's say you get to the point that you are going to have the conversation, you don't have to do it alone. You know, that's the other thing. I think sometimes you can run the risk of feeling that sort of everybody is sort of, you know, on your case and so forth. Try to get yourself into a position where you're not completely isolated. Leverage the structures organizationally that exist to support you also. The things like the HR structures, the OD structures, they are there for a reason. Do not be ashamed to reach out to those sorts of structures. The broader employee sort of support structures in terms of perhaps coaches or employee wellness structures that exist. You know, bounce those sorts of things off those kinds of people if you can find them. Perhaps try, before you go it alone, to reach out to other females who might have been in similar positions or who you have sort of a kinship to. Look for mentorship opportunities. Maybe somebody can mentor you through that conversation. And, you know, even if you're going to have the sorts of conversations, don't even try to have those by yourself. You know, maybe try to have somebody in the room with you. Try to sort of, you know, I want to call it like arbitration, but almost in that kind of environment where there's somebody independent, potentially unbiased to it, who can actually share a balance to you, you know, on both sides, because you also run the risk that you become so bogged down in sort of what's happening that you sometimes don't see the wood for the trees, and where potentially some of it could actually just also be factual or things like that. Yeah, and I'd say, but also, you know, don't flog a dead horse, for lack of a better word, because sometimes you are just not going to be the person who creates the change. You might be one cog in that machine, and don't underestimate that contribution you've made. But I think you also importantly need to realize and then acknowledge where perhaps what you're looking for and your values completely differ perhaps from the organizations or the people you're working with and that sort of thing. And then you need to make the conscious decision and weigh up all those sort of pros and cons at play. You know, can I leave? Do I have to leave? You know, can I just not actually continue to exist in this kind of environment, bearing in mind that it's a really substantial part of your day? Financially, can you do it? Yes or no? Because it is difficult to get jobs. That is the reality of it here. You know, the doors are not just open anymore like they used to be. So again, you know, I don't know if my answer's been helpful, because I think it's a very complex thing to ask, but maybe just some of the principles to stick to. You know, if you're going to give it a go, try not to be isolated, try to leverage networks, other resource available to you, but also try not to flog a dead horse. And
you're right. No, it's very valuable, Siobhain. I think especially the don't be isolated thing. Get some help, whether it's formal or informal. Especially if it's maybe an older female good friend, like almost a mother figure, if you would, in a corporate sense, that's been through it. And especially if it's your first time dealing with it, because probably 90% of your perspective is right, but there could be 10%, because it's emotional, it's difficult, that a good guide and a teacher can just help you. So I think that's extremely valuable.
And I think, you know, you make a good point. Sorry to jump in there, but you spoke about emotion. These are incredibly emotive subjects. I think the key learning I have here, and it's also something that can be quite frustrating and sort of contradictory, though, is to say, as much as it is important to be authentic, because I also hate it when the comment gets thrown out, and Nomsa, I don't know if you've heard this, but women are so emotional. Like, that's a bad thing. I mean, that there's positive to that. There's a different dimension we bring to these conversations and context and so forth that enrich the conversations. But at a point, you also cannot completely, you know, just become about the emotion. You actually need to also try abstract it and be quite sort of unemotional about it in a sense. So it's also a fine balance to bringing your authentic self to those conversations, your experience, but not to the point that you're almost not taken seriously because you've just pushed it so far. You need to be able to hold that space of, this is my authentic self, this is what I'm experiencing, but in a very sort of mature, you know, way. And that also, that's why I encourage, you know, mentorship, speaking to others, because that sometimes can take a lot of time on the road. You know, and be prepared that you're probably going to get it wrong a few times, but you know, play the subject, not the person, that sort of stuff.
Wow. Nomsa? Okay, you can speak for 10 hours on that, well, but love to comment.
Sure. Look, it is a tough one indeed, especially in corporate South Africa, where you find that obviously sometimes you find that your voice is not heard at all. And I must say that it really, really takes a lot for women to raise an issue, because sometimes you will pick it up and you think that maybe I'm a little bit emotional. So by the time it gets to a point where you want to raise it, I think it needs to be acknowledged that you had to think about it quite extensively. But one of the things that you need to look at is, what is the value system of the organization? Is it even worth pursuing this conversation? Is your value system aligned to the value system of the organization that you are serving? Because you have organizations that are purely focused on profit, and you are all just a commodity. You know, you're all just a number in these organizations. So by the time you approach the issue and you start talking about it, one, you must be very much aware of what it means. Because sometimes the minute a woman starts talking about things, you get labeled negatively to say, oh, Nomsa, she's really stubborn and she talks too much, or whatever the case may be. So you stand a chance of being labeled negatively. So before you raise it, you have to look at the pros and cons, like my colleague is saying, and then you know what it is at stake, and you know the chance that you are taking. And I also believe that you need to be looking at the policy of that organization. You need to be looking at HR, you know, to see how best can you raise these challenges that you are experiencing. And I think all of us in organizations, we have to be thinking about, is this the the career environment that we want to be creating, we need to be learning to say this pushing and this discrimination, of women in their workplace, how is it impacting us globally? How is it impacting, the nation that we are serving, the continent that we are serving? How about we take the technology that we are talking about to ensure that our workspaces, they are conducive for women to work. But it is important that you're raising it with the right people to start off with. And I do agree that it's not a journey that you take alone. It's a journey that needs to be measured. It's a journey that needs to be calculated, but it is important that it is raised, even if it is raised, even at a board level, to say, how is this organization taking into consideration, the gender equality, the gender parity, because it is important that we have the right voices at the right places. And we have to push organizations to change. They may not be aware that they are discriminating against women, they're discriminating against gender. So sometimes when you're raising these things, because if you're chasing profit, you're chasing performance, you're chasing high-performing organizations, sometimes you're not looking at people, you are looking at skills, you are looking at the high-performing individuals. So it's something that we need to raise without fear of what they may do to you, because if your challenges are not taken into consideration, are you in the right organization? Yes, it's not easy to find another employment, but do you want to really be serving an organization that is not taking you seriously, that is discriminating you, that is not paying you well, that is completely ignoring you? No, you don't want to serve an organization like that, because if you're quiet about it, you're saying the next woman should be quiet about it, meaning it can never change.
What I want to do, look, there's so much to think about. I can't wait to listen to this the recording again and to send it to a lot of the dudes I work with, guys, ladies. We started with AI, biases in the data sets, and in the 10 or 15 or so minutes we have left before we open for Q&A, I want to go back to it. But I want to just quickly say something that we haven't really touched on, and I definitely think it's relevant for a future conversation, is people who identify from a gender point of view differently, non-binary. I mean, there's all these different ways that people talk about gender, and there's a lot of controversy, a lot of misunderstanding. But I sometimes wonder how businesses approach that. Is it just men and women, or what if you identify in a different way? And so I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's a very relevant topic that we need to get into in time. I want to start with education. Statistics show that only 3% of Africans who enter the data science field are female. Only 3% of young girls entering the workforce are data scientists. And I think one of the reasons is the narratives we talk about. And I've written about this extensively, and I often talk about this. About 2 years ago, my son and I did I helped him with an assignment for school. And the topic was, are robots our friends? And as I've said earlier, my son is adopted, he's African, he's got a fantastic tan, where I don't, So, but we were Googling AI, robotics, and the like, and almost all of the images, and you can still find it if you test it, all of the images you see are Caucasian-looking male robots, almost all of them. And even if you use a generative AI large language model, and you say, draw me a picture of a robot or a team of robots, it'll probably be male-looking, Caucasian-looking robots. And he asked me a question that bombed me away because I never thought about this. He said, Daddy, why do these robots all look like you and not like me? And it gave me so much to think about. And then I started working with University of Cambridge, for instance. They have an incredible initiative to recreate images regarding AI and robotics and IT and digitization that's more inclusive. Because why should we not have female-looking robots, darker skinned-looking robots? And this is not a political thing. I think one of the reasons we have so few young females in Africa entering the field of tech is because the narrative they hear every day is it's a man's world and it's a white man's world. You know, so I want to maybe in the next few minutes, let's start with this future of AI from a gender diversity point of view. We can talk about STEM education and the like. We can also talk about, you know, the societal challenges. If you walk to school for 3 hours a day and you probably walk back then to make food for your kids because your parents are gone, it's a challenge we have here. I want to start with you, Nomsa. How can we is it financing? Do we work with the UN? Is it our government? How do we get young girls in Africa to get excited about AI, knowing it's in their hands and their power to enter this field? It's not a man's field as well, necessarily. What would you say?
Sure. Johan, it's not very easy, but it is possible. So what we need to be looking at is the exposure. Are they exposed to the STEM career choices? You know, so that's where we need to really be starting, you know, because if you're not exposed and you don't know about it, it really becomes very, very difficult. So we need to be looking at when right at a school level, when we are talking about the career choices, we need to ensure that the women or the girl child has access, you know, to the knowledge, they have access to the training, they have access to information. But the biggest challenge sometimes, especially from the African perspective, is that, first of all, you know, because of limited resources and limited money that your parents may have, you may not have a device, you may not have data, you may not have Wi-Fi, you may not have exposure to all those things. So it means that it does not only take, you know, a girl child and a school, it takes the entire infrastructure in the community to say, how do we make sure that the schools, especially the previously disadvantaged schools, how do we make sure that they're not left behind when we're having conversations about STEM, about technology? You find that they're not even aware of the future world of work because there's no access to that. So we need to bring in government, for instance, to make sure that each and every school in South Africa, in Africa, it has Wi-Fi as a beginning. Number two, we need to make sure that these kids, they have access to devices that will allow them to have this world of information. Because once we get there at that level, it's then easy. Because what you find, I mean, even now, when you look at your corporate South Africa, they say we don't find women, Black women that are in AI, that are in STEM. How are you going to find a Black woman that is in STEM if there's no education that encourages this Black woman to get there? So by the time everyone is looking for us, we are not found. Or sometimes when we are found, we are completely ignored, you know. So the things that we need to be looking at is, how do we make sure that there's infrastructure, there's access to information, there's access to data, there's the right education. People are going to school, but they're getting the worst education you can ever imagine and you can ever think of. It means we need to be looking at the curriculum. What is it that our children are being taught at these schools? You know, because if the curriculum and there's no knowledge, there's no way they would know about the future world of work. So we need to partner with organizations, NGOs that are really keen to work with these schools, to work with companies, to work with families, to make these options available. One of the things that can either make a child succeed or not is their environment that they are exposed to. So if you don't know what you don't know. But the minute you start getting exposure, then you realize that, oh, my world, this is my world. This is what I like. I told you my story to say, I never had access to a computer up until I was post-matric. But sometimes it's very late. So, and you find that if you do not get that access, there is no way that you will be seen in the corporate SA. And I was actually looking and reading an article in terms of the LinkedIn data. It was sort of indicating that women make up to almost 49% of total employment across non-STEM occupations. But when you're looking at the STEM, you find about 29.2%. But the more you grow, as women are starting to have families, that reduces. At the end of the day, by the time you get to the C-suite, you find that the representation drops to from 17.8 to 12.4. So it tells you that, sure, there's a long way for us to go. This study was talking about to say that the percentage of women working in AI today is approximately 30%. Which is a huge, huge challenge. So we need to be looking at how do we solve the problem from the root cause. Once we understand the root cause, then all of us collectively, we will work towards making sure that we take care and we solve the problems that are being experienced. What is the root cause? How can we solve it at a root cause level? Because if we solve it there, when we are looking for women in STEM, women in AI, women in data, we will be able to find them.
Absolutely. Oh, Nomsa. I want to just pause there, Leroy. Your hand is up. I know we've got about 20 minutes. You maybe want to pivot to the questions so long, or any comments from your side?
Yes, I think it's, such an important conversation that we are having. But Hermione Leroux she just has like a short little thing here, and she's like, to speak to Professor Steyn's point of those who don't fit in within a binary gender construct, there's a huge lack of understanding of what gender is and its core. Very often people conflict the idea of sex and gender that is usually a contributing factor to misunderstanding regarding gender. Forms, for example, perpetuates this problem as well, especially in the choices of male and female. Do you want to touch, any of you want to have a touch on that?
Look, so I'll maybe quickly just start, Leroy. Look, it's such an important topic, and I must acknowledge I don't know much about it. I've seen a lot of the videos, the controversy, the good points, etc. But I want to approach everyone with respect and learn from how people identify with life and gender differently. But you are right. If you fill in a form, whether it's a banking account form or anything, it might say male, female, or other, or won't say, but it's almost like, what the hell is wrong with you if you can't say male or female? Even the other day I was at the blood service and they're doing incredible work, but even their form is very biased regarding gender. So the only thing I can say, I think we need a lot more talking about this thinking change. But I'm one of the first to say I don't know enough about it, but it is important. And I don't know if Nomsa or Siobhain have anything to maybe add to this point, but it is a very important point.
I think the first part is to, acknowledging each other as humans first. We are all humans. We all bring so much intelligence on the table. We all bring so much skills on the table. And I think it has to start with respect, and embracing human for who they are. So once we look at the respect and we look at the value that each voice brings on the table, because we have lack of understanding, I must say, but what then supersedes the understanding is understanding or allowing all voices to be heard, all voices to be understood, and all voices to add value. Because the fact that we lack understanding, it means that we need to be opening ourselves to learning and providing a conducive environment for anyone to work. There is nothing that is soul-breaking than walking into an environment where you feel discriminated, you are not heard, you are not seen, you are not given an opportunity purely because of who you have chosen to be or because of what you identify as or who you identify as. Let's be human first, and let's open the working space, and let's allow every creativity to add value.
Very true.
Wow.
Yeah, Johan, I think from my perspective, I would just fully concur with, I think, what both you and Nomsa have said. And I guess that goes back to the principle that this entire conversation is founded on. Yes, it's maybe focused on gender bias, but there are so many others. So it's about the human at the end of the day. I think what I would also try to say is, and maybe it's quite controversial because I'm also sort of a very pragmatic, practical person at the end of the day. There are so many different layers to this conversation, and to sort of maybe why certain things are the way they are. So I think at the same time, while these things are incredibly important to drive, to shift the conversation and the thinking in, there also has to be an appreciation for the monster that you're trying to shift. You know what I'm saying? Not just because of sort of generational biases that exist. Think of your own parents and their views and their philosophies, but actually also just very fundamentally at operational levels, the things that need to change. So as an example, in South Africa, organizations need to report various statistics on their workforces, things like gender. So their forms in the workforce might say still male, female, other, whatever it might be. But those organizations can't change that form if the person requesting the reporting still is a system that only allows for that. Do you know what I mean? So practically, there might also, as much as it is concerning and not correct, be very sort of practical reasons why some of that stuff is still happening and still seen. And so then it's about where you focus your energy on trying to shift that conversation just at the practical level. Because again, you can have these very philosophical, very theoretical conversations, but I think what we're saying is until it translates into practice, it doesn't become tangible and feel tangible. But then also it's about ensuring you don't misdirect your efforts, perhaps sometimes in the incorrect places when it becomes an operational sort of thing. If I'm sort of making sense. So I think it's the essence of it, incredibly important to continue to have the conversations in organizations, all of that sort of a thing, but also about being sort of aware of where you can have influence, how you influence, and who you need to influence to see that trickle through the system. So until Home Affairs changes their construct of how they capture gender, that's going to be very difficult in some respects for organizations who have a responsibility legally to report against that to make the same change. But how can those organizations then perhaps be the voice that lobbies, at that level and that sort of stuff? So it's just another interesting lens perhaps to consider for people in the room.
So
very interesting. And then I just want to pivot slightly to you, Johan. Just Zamandlovu, mentioned something in the morning about having a male panelist, and I think you being the male expert here. What are the challenges or experiences you have driving gender inclusion?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it would be good to have 2 or 3 other men in this conversation in a safe space, because it's okay to say I don't always understand it, maybe because of how I grew up. I see it with all the guys around me. They're making jokes about women being in the kitchen and blah blah blah. Some men are obviously a lot more enlightened than others, but and it's not even a gender thing as such. It's about self-education, and it's about popping your head out of the world you've grown up in and read books that's got different views. Meet people from different religions. Meet people with different. We spoke about gender identification, or live in different areas, and that's why I love this country, despite all our challenges. And having lived overseas, that we've got such different kind of people here. Yes. That if you and it's not necessarily that they all live far away, even just in the town or the village or the city you live in, you can have the richest experience of different kind of people that makes your life rich if you're open to it. That would be my advice. Like, are you self-aware? Are you stuck in, because remember, even our social media feeds are just bombarding our biases all the time. It's almost like the world, even though this technology is increasing so much, our worlds are becoming smaller and smaller. Get out there, meet other people, go to a club. For me, like, I've never been to the Soweto Derby. I'd love to go. I don't like soccer even, but I'd love to go. Luckily, I do have many friends who are from different races, but hopefully that answers your question. I see Siobhain also has a hand up. I think if the individual is not aware enough and mature enough emotionally, it possibly won't happen. But you're missing out on a wealth of amazing experiences in this country if you are closed down and not meeting other people. I would say, Leroy. I don't know, Siobhain, what would you add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Johan. No, I was just going to say, as regards the sort of comment that was made about men sort of being on these panels, I couldn't agree more. I advocate for that myself. So I think you've literally taken the words out of my mouth in that respect to the individual who raised the question, because you can't drive change with the other, and I would say the other half, because as I said at the beginning, this is not just a male-female thing, this is a female-female thing, etc. But without, you're inherently introducing bias into how you're trying to solve the problem if men are not sort of part of the conversation, part of the solution, and bringing their perspective to the conversation. And as I said, what I also just want to do is give a perspective to the men who are incredibly supportive and who are getting this right and who are helping their female counterparts and who are having the tough conversation, because I also have an incredible amount of respect for how isolated those individuals must potentially at times feel, depending on sort of the broader context around them. If you are in an organization where culturally this sort of thing is a problem, or anything like that, and you are sort of one of maybe few men who sort of are doing your part and so forth, you can just also appreciate how isolating that must be amongst the rest even of sort of your male colleagues to sort of share the less popular view. So again, I think it's just, and I absolutely agree. I think it would bring such an interesting dimension to this conversation to have more men participating, but hopefully also joining the audiences to hear some of the lived experiences, because maybe it'll spark an idea or a thought or a slight shift, that can just be the start of something.
Wow.
Wow.
Leroy?
Really wow. Sorry, I'm also just trying to take that in a little bit. There's some questions here, but I think before we end up with the questions, do you guys have just like any last remarks, final remarks that you'd like to make on the topic? Nomsa, Siobhain, Johan?
If I may come in, I must say that it will take a global intention, for us to change the way we think, for us to change the way we work. And one of the reasons we need to look at the ensuring that there's no gender bias where AI and technology is concerned is to ensure that some of the challenges that we are sitting with, we can use the very same technology to try and resolve. If we do not have all the right people represented, we may actually continue to perpetuate the problem even further with the technologies that are being used, because obviously technology amplifies, either in solving a problem or in creating a problem to be worse. So I believe that we need to really relook at, in terms of how we're driving organizations, how we're leading organizations. Are we leading organizations for the betterment of a human? And if we're not leading organizations to the betterment of a human, then there's a lot that we need to really start doing, start changing. I believe that if we start the change, does not matter how small it is. I do understand that because we're in a capitalist environment, what is important is the profit, is the efficiency, is all those things combined. But if we are not having the right people represented, if diversity is not taken into consideration, we are definitely going to run our economies to a collapse. We're going to perpetuate the divide. We're going to perpetuate the unemployment. So us changing, it impacts the entire, the entire economy at large. So the change is important, and we need to start in our organization, in our own little spaces where we have influence. We need to really be encouraging for the change that we're talking about. It is a huge topic, it is a big topic, but it takes one person to say, this is the route I'm taking, and all people will follow.
I think, Leroy, Johan, if I can maybe also add to what Nomsa has said, especially on the point of, sort of start, you know, in terms of there are things organizations can do and stuff. I think that's also really important, is to try to look at some of the solutions, some of the things that can be done, because there are things, while this might seem really sort of big and overwhelming and oh my goodness, given all this complexity, where do I start? You know, I think it's also just about going back to basics. It's also just about starting small, like we say when we do analytics data. I start small, you know, and build from there. So I would just say simple things like, you know, in some cases the law requires you to sort of set measures around inclusivity, diversity, and so forth. Do that, but do that meaningfully, not as a tick box exercise. Measure that meaningfully and publish the results in a transparent way, not as a way for people to sort of wag their finger at you, but to ignite a conversation about how do we improve, you know, in that sort of spirit. Things like your recruitment practices. Look at the job descriptions you've put out there. Are there biases or aspects that would lead to biases, that would, you know, exacerbate sort of the exclusive nature of what's happening in terms of their requirements? Diversify your recruitment channels. Don't go to the same place. Go to organizations who do encourage STEM and women in STEM. Those sorts of things. Provide equal pay and benefits to women. Like, that has to be one of the simplest things to do. Why would your male, I don't know how anybody can argue that sort of potentially my male counterpart doing like for like would earn more than me. You know, no, I mean, I think that's quite simple. Offer flexible work arrangements. I made the point up front. It always sort of becomes this thing about hybrid. I challenge that it's hybrid and versus flexibility, and just maybe think critically about that. You know, zero tolerance culture around harassment. You know, many females, I think, are too concerned to raise issues that are happening, because what would the consequence of that be to them? Particularly if there is an imbalance in the power dynamic of the person perpetuating the harassment versus the sort of victim of it. You know, look at things like mentorship programs, sponsorship programs, offer equal opportunities around leadership and development for the females in your workforces. Yeah, I just think, you know, those are a few things that I wanted to mention. And I also think it's about, you know, as much as this is sort of a big conversation, and some of those things might seem too big to tackle, there are other ways to get involved, to be part of the change. Even just educate yourself around some of the amazing stuff that is happening, and that is being done across the globe, where potentially you could somehow replicate that or get involved in it. You know, things like promoting inclusive finance for women. I mean, there's Tala as an example. They're a mobile lending platform who uses AI to assess the creditworthiness of women differently, to give them different access to finance. You know, how can you get involved in something like that? How can you build something like that yourself somewhere else? So I also just want to say, you know, try not to get bogged down in sort of the difficulty of it also, but I encourage you just to try in some very small way to become part of that solution. I've given some examples for the workforce, but even go and educate yourself, because there are things that are being done around healthcare, around finance, around agriculture, that maybe, you know, you can try to drive in your own community in a small way that becomes a big thing. So that's where I'll leave it.
Leroy, just there's not much I can add to the amazing things that they've just said. I want to influence my sphere of influence, which is very small. So raising my son respectfully and teaching him to be respectful to all people, be a good brother, a good son, good with colleagues and customers, and a good husband. And if I can get that right, then I've already gone quite far, I think. But so it's almost, there's a lot of parents in this meeting today, male and female, or however you identify. How do we raise our children? How do we deal with people when we queue in the bank? It's difficult sometimes, but it's self-awareness, kindness, and making mistakes and asking forgiveness. It all comes back to us being humans. It's not even an AI conversation as such, you know. Yeah.
Siobhain, yes.
So I know I said one lot, like my last comment, but maybe just one very last thing. And Johan, it's based on what you just said around the human. I think for me, one word that sort of, or two words that capture it, is tolerance and empathy. And I think those for me are critical sort of guiding principles in these sorts of conversations. When you talk about how do you treat somebody in a bank queue, remember there is always a context to how somebody else is showing up, and make the effort to understand that. That's the empathy, and then be tolerant of that. So I will now promise I won't say anything else.
Oh, good. Professor Johan, do you have any last remarks before we close off?
Yeah, look, because I see time has run out, and it's always amazing how quickly time goes when you have a really
Yes.
meaningful conversation. Firstly, Leroy, to you and Courtney and to Caroline and the team at CTU, giving us this platform. I love the fact that it's not the salesy 7 slides about all the courses kind of thing. It's really for the good of the cause. However, I want to encourage people to reach out to all of you because there are some amazing training programs that they're offering. Really great work. So thank you. To Siobhain and Nomsa, you girls are really cool. Ladies, I look up to you. You are my betters. You are super smart. And you contributed so much of great value for your time as well. And then Leroy, just lastly, for everyone who had the time to attend, pity we couldn't get to all the questions and comments, but hopefully people learned something. It triggered some thoughts. So I think that's it. It was a great session. We need 17 more of these a month to really get to the topic, you know.
I agree with you. But just for everybody on the call, I've dropped the LinkedIn accounts for our speakers. So if you'd like to connect with them, you're more than welcome to connect with them as well. Ladies, Nomsa, Siobhain, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us. For me, on a personal level, this has brought so much insight into my way of thinking, how I want to grow my little brother up. You know, my mom is a single mom, you know, and she brought me up, and, you know, she's also in technology. So thank you so much for just your personal experience and sharing that with us. To everyone else, thank you so much for joining. As Professor Johan mentioned, if you want to learn more about Corporate Training Unlimited, CT Training Solutions, I'll pop our website in the chat. But thank you all for being here, and thank you for being part of it. If you do have any questions, you will be popped a mail for any other questions that you'd like to ask. Maybe we can have a part 2. You never know. You never know. But thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy your day then. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.